The 19th century and the early 20th century is a great example of contrasting realities for Jews. I call this my seismic theory of anti-Semitism, and it's actually related to plate tectonics and earthquakes. We know the Earth sits on the crust of the Earth on a series of plates. Where those plates meet are called fault lines. And we know the pressure builds on a fault line, and when it slips, it creates an earthquake. Seismologists call a good earthquake a small little shift, a frequent little movement of the Earth's surface that releases the pressure on the fault line without causing massive damage. That's a good earthquake. A bad earthquake is when the pressure builds for a very long time, decades or longer, and when it finally slips, like stretching a rubber band further and further and further, when you finally let it go, boom, a huge amount of energy goes, a massive explosion, massive damage. Instead of a 5.2 or 4.2 on the Richter scale, you get a 9, you get a 10. That's what's happening in anti-Semitism in Europe. Western Europe, where Jews were emancipated after Napoleon, seemingly, as Jewish identity decreased and went down and Jews were assimilating, anti-Semitism seemed to go down. Eastern Europe never had that. Tsarist Russia, backward. No emancipation. Constant anti-Semitism. Eastern Europe, you had the small little earthquakes going on. The pressure's constantly being released. Jews never forgot they were Jews because the non-Jews of Eastern Europe would always remind them through the persecution, through the shtetls, through the ghettoization, the economic marginalization, the pogroms, the beatings, you name it. But the pressure was constantly released. It never builds to a big crescendo. But in Western Europe, there we see the opposite. Anti-Semitism goes dormant. We have gentlemen's anti-Semitism of Jews not being able to get into country clubs and a few universities. But it's seemingly on the way out. But really it was a fault line that was lying quiet for about 150 years. And then when that fault line finally slips out of seemingly the quietest place, the most enlightened, advanced, culturally developed country in Western Europe, Germany, we get the biggest pogrom in human history. A pogrom that lasts from 1939 to 1945 and led to the death of 6 million Jews.